So good morning, everybody. I just wanted to introduce this piece for our recording purposes. So this is a collaborative supervision model pilot evaluation. So if we can go round and introduce ourselves, just for recording purposes.
My name's Terry Chaplin. I'm the Clinical Placement Expansion Programme Lead for Devon.
I'm Jen Rolfe. I am a lecturer in Occupational Therapy and Placement Lead for Occupational Therapy at the University of Plymouth.
Hi, I'm Della Norris, OT by background, leading the OT Student Placement Expansion Project for Devon and Somerset County Councils.
And I'm Stacey Owen. I'm a CPEP project worker with the Devon Training Hub.
What went particularly well from your perspective, from an HEI perspective? What went particularly well, would you say?
Well, I think to put it bluntly, from our perspective, we work when our students are out on placement because they work as supernumerary members of staff essentially within the organisations that they're placed. We often tend to go with the kind of no news is good news mentality. So if we don't hear very much, then usually we know that things are sort of going quite well. And so I suppose from the placement itself, we had contact with Della, we had contact with Greenfields, we had contact with yourself. So we were, reassured throughout the placement that everything was going well. But I think for us as well, during a time where we're really having some issues, I think it's fair to say, with our capacity. We've got growing cohorts, which is brilliant because we need more OTs to join the workforce, but at the same time our placement capacity needs to grow with our with our student cohorts, and that's been a bit of a challenge for us, especially over the last 2 years. So having this project and identifying new areas of practice where we can place students is absolutely fantastic. And we've had lots of discussions previously about one of our biggest challenges is, yes, we can find role emerging settings or settings where there isn't necessarily an established role for an OT. There are lots of those dotted around the southwest, but one of our bigger challenges is securing and finding long arm supervisors, because unfortunately with the size of our team at the moment, we don't really have the capacity to support many students whilst they're out on placement as their supervisors. So in finding someone as brilliant as Della to come and support our students just meant that we knew that our students were in safe hands, and that I think I felt fairly confident from the beginning that this would be a success, and we're really pleased to say that it definitely has been, and we'd love to have students back there again. They had an excellent time.
Fantastic. So just to clarify, so Della, you were the one that sourced, that found the fabulous Sue Hillsden, and I think it's fair to say, so Sue acted as a long arm supervisor in practice, but I know, Della, you offered quite a lot of support to Sue, didn't you? As well as the support she was able to get from you, Jen, and the training from the university. So maybe a combination between Della and Sue was what made it particularly successful. I don't know.
And just from my perspective, I suppose it was that inability to source that support when we knew that the particular, that Greenfields was so keen to offer that placement. It was, we had to find a solution, and it was just by luck really that social media supported that connection with Sue. And that Sue was she was just so flexible, so supportive, and very easy to work with. So that element of support, I don't think I think she knew I was there. We could have ad hoc discussions. So I suppose when we look at potentially rolling that model out and opportunities in the future, there just needs to be some kind of support mechanism for that long arm supervisor. But no, it worked really well.
Yeah, and something we've actually got more students out on role emerging placements during this block. So it's January block, our final year students are out, and we've got some new placement settings set up in Cornwall as well. And I think something that's worked well in the past, and we would continue to do as a university, is we have some sort of quite short weekly meetings with all of our long arm supervisors, just to sort of touch base with them and make sure they're okay. And it's also a really useful kind of CPD opportunity for us to all link up. And I'm supervising a couple of students on placement in another setting at the moment, and we've got another 4 students elsewhere in Cornwall. And so I meet with the other long arm supervisors each week, and we kind of just discuss any issues that have come up, or sort of tools and hints and tips for how to support students.
Anything that hasn't gone quite so well that could have gone better?
Cool. That's I don't know. I can't off the top. Genuinely, I can't think of anything off the top of my head with regards to this project. I think, but for us, I suppose, but this isn't something that could have been controlled. We really like to do site visits to when we're setting up new placements, because it's great for us to go and meet the teams and just to sort of get a feel for the environment where our students will be placed. But unfortunately, due to the pandemic, we were sort of restricted in terms of where when we could go to visit potential new sites, and so our audits have been done virtually, and actually that's been great, and there's not been any issues so far. But I suppose from our perspective, we really like to get to know the areas where our students are placed, and in this instance we weren't able to do that, but that's no fault of the project. It's just an unfortunate byproduct of what's happening at the moment.
So we will definitely make a note of that, Jen, as an area for development when settings feel more confident, site visits, to do the audit and introductions, and for you to have a recce of the site, and kind of first-hand understand what the learning opportunities might be.
The only thing that I probably, and I think that's been acknowledged, is that we didn't quite realise, we knew that the students would be doing some work at Greenfields and RFI. We weren't quite aware about the Silver Hill element, and I think that potentially, when you look at learning, they had a very broad range of service users, and that might have been confusing for them. So I think in future it's just clarifying.
And actually both students were very adaptable, and because it was a long 9-week placement, they were able to make that that kind of modification to their practice according to the different service user groups fairly easily, weren't they? Whereas if it was shorter placement, that might have been trickier. So no, that's really good. So in terms of students, Jen, have they highlighted any positives and or improvements to you that they might not have shared with us? What have they said to you?
They haven't at this point, so which is a good thing, and just all really positive. The students had a lovely experience, and it was a really lovely learning opportunity for them in a slightly different environment, and a little bit of literature around some qualitative research that's been done for students on these placements, and they kind of talk about how the students follow this sort of roller coaster of emotions. And it's interesting to see that the majority of our students that go out on a placement like this experience really similar feelings as the placement progresses. And so they start off with hearing that their supervisor or their actual practice educator isn't going to be on site, and that kind of makes them feel a bit panicked initially. That first couple of weeks they're not really sure what they're supposed to be doing, and they kind of feel a bit lost, but that's the point at which having that peer with them, that second student, is a really sort of lovely addition, because they can work together and work through those emotions. And then as we get through into sort of week 4 and 5, they start to establish a role for themselves. And what happens towards the end of the placement, which happens or seems to happen more in these types of placements than in our more traditional settings, is the students really start to develop a sense of professional identity, and they get the opportunity to promote the profession, and they get the opportunity to kind of develop that sense of pride as well, that they're really kind of having an impact on people's lives, and feeling quite autonomous as well, which I think is quite liberating for students in these kind of settings. So it's a journey, and it's always been described as such. And I think the students on this placement had a similar experience to that, I'd say.
Yeah, no, I agree actually, and Della, I don't know what you think, but I was part of the conversation that Della had with both students, and it's fair to say, I think, Della, that both of them kind of shared their experiences, certainly around the journey that you've just described, Jen.
Yeah.
Would you agree, Della?
It's to map that out in a way and actually have a visual of that, because actually that is absolutely what they say. I mean, and I went on role emerging placements when I was a student, and that is, you go, you panic beforehand, you get there, you don't know what you should be doing, you get used to the placement, and sort of week 3, week 4, you kind of then develop, and then that sort of that autonomy, and you know, it just emerges. It's about a bit like a chick coming out of an egg, isn't it? And you just see these individuals grow along that short period. It is amazing. But I think it'd be really good to have some kind of visual around that to share with students going on those role emerging placements.
Absolutely,
because it was a role emerging placement or placement in different service. Is there any way that you can support the students to share their experiences with other students, you know, so that if other students have an opportunity, then they are going with less fear, maybe less worry, less anxiety. Is there any opportunity for you to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've done it a little bit before, and perhaps now that our kind of portfolio of placements seems like it will be growing, and we'll have more students who are on long arm supervised placements, shall we say. It's very easy for us to record, for example, some short vignettes and have sort of little video interviews with some of our students who've had placements like that before. Where possible, it would be lovely to have the students to come and speak to the cohorts, but often what happens is that their timetables don't necessarily match up, and we'll have students out on placement at a time when others are preparing to go out, and it doesn't quite match up. But if we can get some pre-recorded content that we can share with those students, then yeah, that's absolutely something we'd explore moving forward.
And that touches on to my next question, because I guess, you know, I'm just thinking, have you identified, or will you be identifying any kind of areas, pockets of the curriculum that could be adjusted so that students are in a position where they're going into these placements? So learning disabilities, for example, a learning disability service, so that they are you know, that they have more knowledge and understanding around that service, and the people that use that service, and the people that work in that service, and the kind of broader social context of people that are using that service. Is there any opportunity for, or any need actually, it should be my question, for the curriculum to be reconsidered and modified and adjusted so that the curriculum better fits or better supports students to prepare for these types of placements?
Sure. So, I mean, I suppose we're restricted to a certain extent in terms of how our programs are approved by RCOT and HCPC, and so the programs and the modules that we present to those organisations at the point of approval, we have some flexibility in terms of what we can deliver with the teaching, but in terms of those modules and the way that the program is set out, that's kind of almost, I'd say, set in stone until we move towards our next approval event, which is in a few years' time. But within the modules that we have, what we have been doing over the last couple of years is trying to explore emerging areas of practice, and OTs working in roles outside of what, you know, what we would normally expect from our colleagues in practice, and we've been increasing the number of outside speakers we have to introduce our students to a wider range of settings.
We are speaking to many social care providers that are really keen to be part of this further rollout. And it's a bit of a chicken and egg, because we need to have a bank of freelance practice educators, and our team needs to expand to be able to facilitate that. So, but there's a significant number of social care providers. But in addition to that, Jen, we're also working with GP practices, and we have just, I think, identified the AHPs that are working in GP practices in Devon. That's been such a hard thing to do. Jo has been working really hard to try and find that information. You wouldn't think that would be difficult, but it has been really tricky. Anyway, so we will start to link with them to think about how they might be able to support students, but also working with PCNs across Devon to think about role emerging placements for GP practices, PCNs as well. And the ones that we've spoken to have all offered to be videoed or to virtually attend a session, a lecture, just to provide students with, you know, from a provider's perspective, more information about the service. So if there's anything that you think, you know, along those lines that might be helpful, do get in touch and we will share with you providers that have offered that, because if you know, if we don't have an OT within that service that can share their experiences, then maybe, you know, the provider or the registered manager of that service can share with students what the opportunities might be. And for example, Nick and Sharon have offered to speak with students and share with students what, you know, what their service is all about, and importantly what the learning opportunities could be within that service. So if anything like that would be helpful, then do give us a shout and we'll link you to relevant providers. In terms of placing more students within Greenfields as a site, is that something that you would consider, Jen? And if so, what stage of training would you consider it to be relevant for?
Yeah, definitely we would. We're very open to considering placements there for both placement 2 and placement 3, and there's still an argument for placing first year students in a setting like Greenfields as well, because there are lots of, I suppose there are clinical bits. It's not so sort of off-piste and left field that our first years wouldn't be able to sort of get their head around the role of an OT within a setting like that. So I think there's definitely scope to consider that, and we've certainly had first years in long arm supervised placements previously. We are in a position at the moment where we have an extra large cohort of first years coming out for April, so we know we need to explore as many opportunities as we can for that particular cohort. So I would anticipate that we would even be open to thinking about first years there. I don't see why not. I don't. There aren't that many arguments against it, to be honest, at this point.
Okay, fabulous. So in terms of your priorities for your students, what are your, so thinking of it as a CPEC team and how we might be able to support you with your priorities, what are your priorities in terms of geography in Devon, or service type, or specific provision for you know, students stage 1, 2 or 3? What would your priorities be, and how can we help with that?
Gosh, well, I mean, I suppose it's like throwing a child into a sweet shop, isn't it? Well, I mean, any placement opportunity can be a valuable opportunity for our students. I suppose that's the first answer, and at the moment we're thinking about capacity, so we would explore any settings where our students would be, you know, supported enough and welcome. We've certainly had a few long arm supervised placements in the past where students have really struggled because the setting hasn't really been able to understand why the student is there, and what they can do.
Yeah, no, fantastic. And it's interesting because when we speak to social care providers particularly, when we spell out the range of AHP student placement opportunities, OT, dietetic students and physio students are the top 3 that they identify as being useful. I say useful in terms of what they can bring to support the knowledge and skills of their workforce, and also obviously the broad learning opportunities that are within those services. So our plan, let me just think. So our plan is, once we've got our staff in place, we will then be rolling out the collaborative supervision model and making it widely available for social care providers to express an interest in having students. It's probably at that stage, when we understand what the interest is, that we will come to you and to Christy probably, and think about you know, matching interest to your student placement need. And then we can, and of course wrapped up within all of that is the is having enough long arm supervisors, isn't it, to support that. So we've kind of got to get all 3 ducks in a row at the same time, and that's going to be our biggest challenge. But I would say so that's definitely something that we will be moving forward with mid-March, end March, early April. So we're probably looking for next, preparing. And our job, of course, Jen, is to support providers to be in a position to offer fabulous placements, so that they know and understand roles and responsibilities, all that stuff. So we're probably looking at next academic year. But if you have a think, if there's anything that we can do as a CPEP team in terms of OT students and placements for the cohorts that you have for this academic year as a priority, do give us a shout, because it could be that we prioritise and we approach services that we think might have an interest, and kind of move forward with those in the first instance. So we can do both. We can send out expressions of interest, but we can also target based on what your priorities might be for this year. Is that all right? So do come back to us.
That's great. Yeah.
What's around that?
Thank you.
So I'm going to stop talking. That's my questions. Della, did you have any questions that we haven't covered that you wanted to ask Jen?
I don't think so. I mean, obviously with the whole model, there's some sort of, still some, I think it's really useful to continue to evaluate and improve. I mean, one of the things that has been raised is if the long arm supervisor goes off sick, and I'm talking probably a longer term sickness rather than just a week. So it's something we considered, and that I would be really picking up that role if Sue had gone off sick. So I think that's one of the things that we just it's just making sure that is all robust, really. But no, I mean, I think there's so much opportunity to be explored, lots of different ways that we can do that. So it's really exciting.
Yeah. Just to say, Della, it's lovely to think that you'd be able to potentially step in some instances, but as well, we've actually got a student at the moment whose educator's been off for the last 3 weeks, and one of the placements team has sort of been able to step in and assume that supervisory role while the educator is off. So usually, there's provision within our team, I suppose, for an emergency. I suppose that's the best way to put it.
I suppose though, if it expands and you've got lots and lots of students, and
then it could be, yeah, exactly.
You might be a bit of a challenge, but
might be a bit stuck, yeah.
But yeah, I think there's still lots of ways that we can support this model, and sort of potentially in areas that are a bit more. So we're thinking about primary care is actually making it a bit more, making a sort of a plan for their development in that placement, because my fear is sometimes students go into these placements and it's very much a shadowing, isn't it, opportunity. And I think if there's no OT there, it's really important that they're able, certainly in second and third years, to be able to develop and make sure that the OT that the OT role is also understood by the practices, because I think that's the other thing that can potentially go a little bit. I mean, we've been really successful having apprentice placements in primary care. But there's always been an OT there. It hasn't been a role emerging setting or a long arm supervision. So yes, lots and lots, I think, still to explore. Yeah. And I just think it's exciting.
And that's our starting position. So that's the whole reason we've tried to, we have on the cusp of getting this database to understand who the AHPs are that are employed in primary care, and often they work within a PCN. So our first, so we've collated that information. Then it's about us asking those professionals to support students on placements, whether it's within their GP practice or whether it's within the PCN, because often, like I said, the AHP works across a number of practices within the PCN. Yes. And then once we've understood, in fact, we had a conversation with 2 dietitians that are employed in a PCN last week. And to be fair, they said that their role is kind of starting to become understood and the opportunities, so they would really welcome having students once they know what their role is going to involve. So I think that's our first port of call, to identify the AHPs currently working in PCNs, encourage them to support students, then we'll have a clearer idea of learning opportunities, and then start thinking about role emerging placements thereafter, because we'll have a bit more confidence, I think, won't we, that they will have that really productive experience and not just a shadowing experience. So yeah, thank you very much indeed.
Lovely.
Nice to see you.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.